called Valiant Ambition, George Washington, Benedict Arnold, and the Fate of America. Nathaniel Philbrick, welcome back to the Big 550 KTRS.
Oh, it's great to be back.
You betcha. Did you like the Hollywood movie At the Heart of the Sea?
Yeah, it's a movie, so it has its own vision. But it was such a pleasure to work with Ron Howard. And as a sailor, I've never seen a movie that gives you the feeling of what it's like to be at sea. And the whale attack scenes are amazing. So I'm just proud to have had that experience.
Yeah, well, considering what Hollywood does with many other works of art, it could have been a disaster, but it was relatively true to the story, and I thought it brought a whole new audience to your book.
It did. It's been very gratifying in that respect.
Yeah. All right, this new book, Valiant Ambition. We first learned that George Washington and Benedict Arnold worked together when Peter Brady from the Brady Bunch was in the play. But has it really been uncovered exactly what was going on between George Washington and Benedict Arnold?
Yeah, well, I think most people, when they hear the name Benedict Arnold, just think traitor, evil incarnate, and that's he's been kind of a caricature. But the fact of the matter is, in the first couple of years of the Revolution, he was our best battlefield commander. He won string of victory after victory, climaxing at Saratoga, the battle that would bring in the French on the side of the Americans, and Washington was deeply appreciative of it. And I think there's a side of Washington that almost envied Arnold. If Washington had been 10 years younger and not saddled with the crushing responsibility of command, he could have been on the battlefield, winning these kinds of these battles. And Arnold would be not appreciated by the politicians, overlooked for promotion. And meanwhile, Washington was suffering his own issues with the Continental Congress, who weren't providing him with the support he needed financially, that were arguing among one another, and deeply suspicious, really, of a military commander who might someday co-opt the civil government, which was hardly ruling the country. It was really a dysfunctional Congress long before what we've witnessed today.
It makes sense. You don't want a spy who isn't very smart, who doesn't have any access to power, who doesn't know what's going on. So they would want the most powerful person possible to become a spy for the crown. Right.
Yeah, and Arnold was that. He was an American hero. And he was badly hurt at Saratoga, so he wasn't able to take an active field command, but he was able to manage to get command at West Point, which was the most strategic fortress in America, full of 3,000 soldiers and military equipment. It was absolutely key. And by 1780, when Arnold began to discuss with the British the possibility of turning over West Point, the American Revolution was kind of falling apart. Americans were putting a lot more energy into fighting themselves than fighting the British. There was a kind of civil war going on, and Arnold convinced himself that the American people who had showed such courage and ideological fervor back in 1776 with the Declaration of Independence had kind of turned their backs on what they had started, and it was time to bring the British back into it and end this suffering that America was embroiled in.
Nathaniel Philbrick, our guest. The book is called Valiant Ambition, George Washington, Benedict Arnold, and the Fate of America. What was it? What piece of cloth did you uncover? What sort of letter did you open that said, this is a book?
Well, it's kind of amazing. In the early 20th century, a library out in Michigan, the Clements Library on the campus of the University of Michigan, got the Henry Clinton papers. And Clinton was the British commander at the time of Arnold's treason. And in those letters was the correspondence between Arnold and British spy master Major John Andre. And it's fascinating. These are coded letters that are then deciphered, and you can see the back and forth. And you can also see that Arnold was not acting alone. His wife, Peggy, she was half his age, a loyalist aristocrat from Philadelphia, was deeply involved. In fact, she had known Andre before when the British had briefly occupied Philadelphia, and was probably the key person in initiating that correspondence. And so, when you can hold a letter that was written by Arnold in code, it just, you begin to realize, wow, there is definitely a story here.
Yeah. So George Washington and Benedict Arnold. Also, Alexander Hamilton was very close to George Washington. How much Alexander Hamilton is in this story?
There's quite a bit of Hamilton, because when Arnold's betrayal is revealed, Washington is just about to arrive at Arnold's headquarters. Arnold learns that Andre has been captured and that they know of his involvement. He speaks to Peggy, says, "I'm out of here." He escapes down the Hudson River in his barge back, and eventually ends up in British-occupied New York, just as Washington knocks on the door and learns from Hamilton, Lafayette, and Henry Knox, who are with him, that he has been betrayed by one of his best battlefield commanders, and Hamilton is there, but at this moment, Peggy goes into hysterics. They seem to have been designed to provide a diversion while her husband escaped down the river, and Hamilton would be absolutely transfixed by this beautiful young woman, only 18 years old, in her nightgown, in her bedroom, and he would very happily sit by her side, consoling her as she wailed about the exit of her husband. It was assumed that she was innocent as the driven snow. It wouldn't be until that correspondence made its way to that Michigan library that we would know for sure that Peggy was involved. In the meantime, she did a wonderful job of covering her tracks, and Hamilton went for it, hook, line, and sinker.
You're going to be in St. Louis June 3rd, 7 o'clock at the Ethical Society of St. Louis for a book signing and a book reading. Our guest is Nathaniel Philbrick. Valiant Ambition is his new work. George Washington, Benedict Arnold, and the Fate of America. In terms of full disclosure, I am a super fan of yours. I haven't read everything, but I've read quite a bit, and it's hard. Once you pick it up, it's awful hard to put it down. Benedict Arnold, he lived out, not to give away the end of the story, but he lived out his days in England, did he not?
Yeah, well, it didn't go well with him in terms of he was a traitor to the American people, and it's the great irony. It was when it was his treason was revealed, it was a huge wake-up call to the American people. They go, "Oh my gosh, how could this hero do this?" It was and it was his treason that really did more to reunite America towards the end of the Revolution than anything else. It's a great irony. Back with the British, he would fight on their side towards the end of the Revolution and perform very well, but he was a traitor in their eyes. He would return to England, work as a merchant in Canada for a while, but eventually die in London with huge debts. Peggy would be forced to do her best to get the family out of debt, and she would do that. She was clearly a very strong woman, but it was really the end of he lived out his life in misery, and he always claimed that he was convinced America was going to lose, and what he was trying to do was to end it quickly, get it over with, and ultimately what he was trying to do was best for the American people. That doesn't change the fact that he only insisted on doing this after England agreed to pay him quite a bit of money.
How much money? Do we have any idea?
Yeah, it's something like £10,000, which is a lot of money back then, and it also and he didn't get that full amount because he was unsuccessful, but he got quite a lot, and it's been calculated that no one made more money out of the Revolution than Benedict Arnold.
Wow. Nathaniel Philbrick, our guest, his new book, Valiant Ambition. He's going to be in town June 3rd, at the Ethical Society of St. Louis. So how damaging were the secrets that Benedict Arnold passed on to the British?
Well, what happened was he had a secret midnight meeting with John Andre on the west bank of the Hudson, and he gave, they went over how it was going to happen. There was a huge British fleet down in New York. The soldiers had already been placed in the ships, and they were poised to head up the Hudson. And Arnold, who was stationed at West Point, would do everything he could to make sure the fortress surrendered as quickly as possible. And in that midnight meeting, he gave Andre detailed drawings, plans of the fortress, along with lists of armaments and suggestions as to how they should approach. And Andre was almost on his way back to New York. He was making his way down the east bank of the Hudson in what's now Terrytown, New York.
Sure.
He was captured by three militiamen, and the gig was up.
George Washington must have been crushed to learn that his man that he looked up to had a silent man crush on, turned out to be a traitor.
Oh, and there's this a tremendously moving scene. He's there with Hamilton, Lafayette, and Knox. He learns of what has happened. He turns to Lafayette, who is this kind of young French officer who's become almost a surrogate son to him, and he says to Lafayette, "Whom can we trust now?" I mean, it was an absolute body blow to him. You know, it just rocked him off his foundations. He would quickly rebound, and now it was very personal for Washington. They tried to say, "Hey, let's do a swap. We'll swap Major Andre for Arnold." The British refused to do that, but after Andre would eventually be hanged as a spy, and Arnold and now the war would click into a very personal gear. Now it was personal. Arnold would go down to Virginia, burn Richmond. Washington sent Lafayette down to get him, and the hope was not to assassinate him, but to capture him and hang him as the traitor he was.
Nathaniel Philbrick, our guest, he's in town June 3rd at the Ethical Society. His new book, Valiant Ambition, Run, Don't Walk, download it, whatever you have to do. Valiant Ambition, George Washington, Benedict Arnold, and the Fate of America. Are you saying, Nathaniel Philbrick, that if Benedict Arnold never happened and wasn't a traitor, the American colonists would have lost their energy for the freedom they were fighting for?
It's a very good question. It's a great what if, because it was so bad in the summer of 1780. Not only was the army mutinying, they didn't have food, but we had suffered two devastating defeats to the south. Charleston had been lost to the British, and then Horatio Gates, who had been kind of a rival to Washington and was Arnold hated, was leading the Southern Army and was completely whipped at the Battle of Camden. I mean, it was all going in a very bad direction. And, you know, it was as if the American people had given up. But with Arnold's treason, it was the true wake-up call. This war is ours to lose. And yes, you could say without Benedict Arnold, who knows? You know, it's an intriguing question.
Yeah. Has Ron Howard picked up the option for the book yet?
There's interest. I really can't go into anything because there's nothing definite.
Well, hold out. Have you write the script of the miniseries, because it's always better when the author writes the script, even though Hollywood tells you differently.
All right.
Nathaniel Philbrick. The book is Valiant Ambition: George Washington, Benedict Arnold, and the Fate of America. Get it at bookstores everywhere. He'll also be at the Ethical Society in St. Louis on June 3rd. Nathaniel Philbrick, thank you for your time. Good luck with the book.
It's great to talk with you again, McGraw.
You got it. 9:49 here, Big 550 KTRS. I hate to go from such a high